Welcome. I'm so glad that you could come back and take some time and chat with me. I have my cup of tea here, hiding behind me. This is orange mandarin. Good old tea bag. It suits my budget, and I really like the flavor. So I have something to chat with you today, and it's been on my mind this week because it's been in the media this week. The week before Halloween, and it has to do with something that happened on a show called, I think, Today with Megyn Kelly. I'm going to be talking about that as an example, but the thing is that, as we know, it's something that has been happening more and more frequently. It affects us all, and that's why I think she was highlighting the issue, and ironically, the very thing that she was highlighting is the thing that happened to her. And I am a viewer. I am just an obscure person somewhere in the audience out in cyberspace. And in the face of seeing what has happened to her as she was expressing something, I feel like, and I want to put a response out to this because I am an educator. And because I think that we really need to make it safe for us as people to express ourselves and learn from our mistakes. And yeah, so let me just develop this idea for you. Okay, like I'm just gonna go on and tell you what I've seen. So there was a 5-minute clip on what she called Fashion Police. I'm going to look at my notes, and it's just my way to make sure that I'm as organized and as succinct as I most possibly can, so that I know it's not really great for the eye contact and the communication that I have with you, the viewer, but I do kind of need my notes just to sort of make use of your time as well. So there was a 5-minute clip on what she referred to as the fashion police with regard to the topic of Halloween. Now, what she said, I don't believe, was made to be malicious. It was not coming from a malicious space. She was diplomatic, she was calm, she was factual, and she was not being hateful. What she was saying is basically, all of the things that we don't allow for costumes at Halloween because people find it offensive has gotten sort of, I think, out of hand, and we point the fingers unnecessarily with a whole lot of thou shalt nots. I think there's a lot of blaming happening when we point the fingers to other people and say, you should not be doing this. So let me explore this with you. The reaction to her presentation was, I think, disproportionate, in that the results, people were making videos talking about this 5-minute segment, which I think the offensive part was basically just a couple of turns of phrase that were indeed what I think are questions. She was saying, why should this be offensive? They were clearly questions more than statements. The responses were angry, and they were saying that when she was talking about blackface, the sort of, the historically, the archetype of blackface, where people on stage would sing, Memmy, and have the large lips and that sort of that blackface figure. You can't do that as a Halloween costume. Somehow that ended up being part of the topic. And she was asking, why is that offensive? The term blackface was also sort of interchangeably used with donning black skin makeup to look like you have black skin. And the two are not interchangeable. It's different to make your skin look black or to have black face. Anyway, the issue was doing that is offensive, no matter how you can't divide the two. It's offensive. So it resulted in her making an apology. Kudos, obviously. Showing a learning curve. That's responsible behavior. And but then it also ended in her losing her show. It was put off the air, and that, I think, That's too far. That is not right, and I will explain why. She was targeted to make an example. She was the face, the person who did it. What about the producers and the writers and the camera crew and everybody who planned that segment? Nobody, I mean, she did not just act in a vacuum. She was reading things off of a cue card. This was a planned segment that had been researched. So they made cue cards. There was planning that went into this, and yet she was the one who was targeted, because you need to have somebody who's punished, right? Socially, that is what needs to be seen. That is what we expect as people. So I look at that as Joe viewer, and I say, it was canceled. That's really sad. I wasn't a watcher of the show, but I think, oh, that's sad. And then I just sort of, with my mouse, I click on to the next newsreel and go on without really appreciating that this lady is living a hellish experience for saying something that indeed was a learning curve. It makes the climate unsafe for discussion, because she was presenting a discussion. So people who are not of a given race or culture do not know the whole history of that culture, like the minstrel sort of blackface part of Black history. That may not be on the forefront of your mind. And I don't think that was on the forefront of her mind when she was explaining or saying, what's wrong with that? She was genuinely saying, what's wrong with that? As I'm sure many people would have. And they should be allowed to experience a learning curve safely in our society. And by taking her show off and by targeting her with angry comments, it shows a very unsafe learning environment. If children were taught that way in school, if adults were taught that way in classes, it would not be a safe learning environment. And I am an educator, so I am sensitized to this. And that's why I'm speaking about it, because life is a learning journey. There was evidence. I looked at her clip, and she said, blackface, what's wrong with blackface or whiteface? Whiteface is not a real thing. I looked up whiteface. There's like Whiteface Mountain. Whiteface is not even a thing. So she didn't mean the minstrel sort of blackface makeup, the circle, that stage, that point in history. She didn't mean that. She was talking about skin tone. What is wrong with people donning a color of skin tone that is not their own to complete their costume? Still, either way, I understand that blackface or putting on black skin is the issue of offense. So the tone of the responses were angry, and it incited anger. So when there are angry responses, there is more anger that happens. It sort of justifies defensive behavior. When we see people talking with anger instead of educating about their race or their culture, diplomatically, systematically, without that defensive response, then it justifies being defensive. Our children are growing up in a climate where you can study your whole life, work your whole life to get the dream job you want, like Megyn Kelly did, and then lose it all in 5-minute conversation. That's problematic. Sometimes in our careers, there are learning curves, and I think that it really needs to be. I mean, she didn't make this mistake out of a vicious irresponsibility and intentional. She wasn't intentionally insulting. She was coming from a place of lack of information. That's why I think the response to her was disproportionate. And if I, as Joe Schmo, sit back and don't at least make my 5-minute response, or my however long this is going to be in the video, then I refuse to be complacent. That's the whole thing. I don't want to be complacent and just sit back and say it's okay for us to create this world for our children who are going to grow up, and we treat people as disposable. We treat people as they're disposable. You said something wrong, go home, lick your wounds, but there's somebody else who's going to replace you the very next day. That's a scary message for anyone, adult or child. So it can make everyone feel so insecure, so they either learn to be silent and just don't talk about cultural appropriation, don't talk about culture, don't talk about race, don't do it. You'll lose your job, you'll be, engaged in a conversation that's very fiery and angry. So, or the other reaction could be, they become so indifferent and say, well, you know what? Everybody's going to take offense anyway. So who cares what I say? I'll just go ahead and be offensive. And in your face, if you don't like it, I'm just going to be entitled to my opinion and blah, blah, blah. Is that what we want to promote as people, as a society, as adults in our world? Is that what we want to promote? Certainly, you can take part in promoting education and facilitating a conversation around race and culture and everything else, sexuality, you name it, so that we can be sensitized to each other without being defensive. I learned years ago a very important lesson. Nobody can make you feel something. You choose to feel. Isn't it Eleanor Roosevelt who said, nobody can make you feel inferior without your permission? Nobody can make you feel angry. That's what I learned. And it was more in the context of in the face of abuse, right? So you have the victims who are tiptoeing around the abuser and saying, oh my God, if I had only made the eggs this way, he wouldn't have been angry. No. In the face of the same situation, in the face of eggs that were not cooked the way I want, I can either choose to be angry and the behavior along with it, or I can choose to not be angry. And so that's what's happening with our society, is that we are tiptoeing around. Now, I understand. I'm not saying that speaking up for your race or your culture is abusive to everybody else. But it's the way that we educate ourselves. No one person can be an authority on the history of absolutely every culture and every race and every bit of, what makes you offended. And not every culture chooses to feel offended in the face of somebody else wearing their clothes or, whatever. So it means that you have to walk on eggshells and be sort of really tiptoeing and be careful. On the surface, that seems to be the norm, and that seems to be the new normal, and that seems to be okay. But I think it's really, really sad when you see, oh, Megyn Kelly, the whole show is gone now, but that she's just one example of how quick we are to react with a hammer and dispose of people, so that they can be an example of thou shalt nots in our society. And this reactivity to concepts about race and culture is not productive. Let people safely experience learning about each other. Speak gently as you teach others about your race or your culture. If people want to dress like XYZ, let them. Self-expression. Produce material to educate, not to point fingers in anger and blame them and to make an offensive response. Educate them. It is presumptuous to think that everyone everywhere should know every bit of history about your particular culture and race. Now, granted, we've talked at length about Native history and Black history, and there seems to be a collective understanding about some things in those cultures. But I would hate to think that we have to sort of isolate certain cultures as being treated differently than every other culture who doesn't, mind if, or every other race who doesn't mind if you dress like them. You know, we are all here. We are all, you know, a lot of people are of mixed race. And so I think there's a lot of room for discussion, and that we have to kind of remove the sort of the anger that makes the discussion uncomfortable. Mainly because somebody like, in this situation, Megyn Kelly, clearly she was not coming from a place of wanting to be offensive. She was basically talking about PC being a tool for silencing people. You know, PC is being politically correct. Even if you want to be politically correct, you end up really having to do your job and say nothing so that you don't offend. And it's your job as a listener, as a viewer, to either take offense or not to take offense. You have to take responsibility for how you're interpreting information. So there's communication is a two-way street. There's the person who's putting out the information, like the person who's wearing the costume or the person who's saying the information on television. And there's also the listener and the viewer who's taking that. And there has to be some sort of a balance. It's not just all, you know, one. We can't just blame all the time and not take responsibility for how we interpret information. So let's have a productive education. In the words of Maya Angelou, when we know better, we do better. I think that Megyn Kelly really modeled that notion when she came on and she apologized. She apologized. And then after that apology, the very next day she was no longer on the air. Did she know or did she not know that she was going to get snipped off the next day when she gave that apology? Either way, I think her apology was sincere. Megyn Kelly was not afforded the right or the luxury of freedom of expression. So her learning environment on her job, we all learn on our jobs. We learn every day in every situation, and it was not a safe environment for her. I did really appreciate the way that the situation was handled. They had Roland Martin come in and provide education. So that was really lovely. I liked his approach. I really appreciate how Roland Martin spoke about Black history and provided information for people who have a lack of the education on those issues as they pertained to this situation. None of the people who produced the segment, I mean, presumably they have different people of color and people who research history and that sort of thing when they're producing their segments. And so there was no sort of discussion against what Megyn Kelly was saying at that point. So I don't think it's something that is glaringly obvious to people who are of color, all people of color, because it was able to be a segment that was put on TV and it wasn't addressed as offensive at the table. I'm not saying that it's not offensive. I'm just saying that if it's not glaringly obvious to people who are producing the segment, who are educated and who don't want to offend people, then why would Megyn Kelly not be afforded the space to have an opinion about questioning why that would be a bad thing? You know, it takes an expert like Roland Martin to come in the very next day and to address that situation. It's not something. I mean, I knew about blackface and about that bit of Black history, but it's not glaringly obvious to everyone. So we need to, just because you know it and I know it, doesn't mean we have to punish other people for not knowing it. We carry them along and provide education. Now, and there was even disagreement in the panel itself when Roland Martin came on and addressed it the next day. There was a woman there who said, she was a person of color, she said to Megyn, I can dress like Diana Ross, but you, Megyn, sorry, you're white, so you can't. And then, so that's her opinion. But then Roland Martin said, so there's disagreement even amongst black people. Roland Martin said, yeah, you can, as a white person, dress as Diana Ross. You can wear the afro, but not the black skin. That's the line you can't cross. Well, her hair, Diana Ross's hair, is not a white person's hair. So I think there's room for discussion in that. But the point is that even if people of color don't agree on these issues, then why would a person who, like Megyn Kelly, not be able to ask the question and make statements that are demonstrative of a need for learning? Why was that unsafe learning environment created for Megyn Kelly? And I'm asking this because I have a background in psychology. I'm very much into personal development, spiritual growth, and I am an educator of young children. And I expect to produce safe learning environments. And I think life is a journey, and we all learn through life, and we need to create a safe learning environment for everyone all the time. And if we can't afford that kindness to people who, like Megyn Kelly, is obviously not intentionally offensive, then we have a problem, and that's why I'm addressing it. Just as a viewer. Because we all have a voice, and I have a platform, I have a channel, so I'm take it or leave it, but there it is. So I want to explain something. I want to send a message to Megyn Kelly. Why? Because when you're in that kind of a situation, I haven't had that kind of a job, but I've been in situations where it just seems like the whole world is against you. And in this situation, I would imagine that Megyn Kelly is feeling very targeted. Okay? And it would feel absolutely wonderful. I remember in my own life, if somebody comes to say, you know what, I don't think what you did was horrible. Like, I've had situations where somebody has come to speak to me and said, what you faced was unfair. So I would like to speak to Megyn Kelly and say, you know what, I barely know you. I didn't even watch your show. But I saw what happened this week because it was highlighted. It was brought to light. So I feel sad that your show has been canceled because of this. The irony is that the whole segment was to highlight how political correctness is a bit extreme at times because of the defensiveness that it incites. You were promoting discussion, and yet the irony is that you got, squashed because you weren't PC. So there's an irony in there that I'm not sure I'm explaining very correctly, but it's demonstrative that the very thing that you were highlighting is the very tool that was used to take you off your show and kind of put you in a place of silence. The managers and the writers of the show, the team with which you work, that produced this segment, and yet only you were held responsible. I thank you for speaking out about the politically correct climate. I respect that you were naive to the topic of blackface. I think it is okay to be uninformed, and to experience a learning curve as a human being, because we are not robots, right? It's okay to be uninformed about some things, and you modeled learning, and that's ideal. You did it with grace and with style, and you did it really well, and I admire you for that. I respect your decision to apologize. I applaud your interview with Roland Martin and your openness to learning about Black history of the past 400 years as he presented it. I see your strength in character and your kind soul. You do not deserve to lose your job over this segment because the fact that can happen shows how volatile and reactive we have become in the face of political correctness. So let's be kind to each other while educating each other. She has bravely dealt with the criticism with aplomb. That is why I wanted to respond with this video. Plus, if no one else will recognize it, I will take the time to do it now. Megyn Kelly, your comments about blackface were more questions than comments. You clearly asked, quote, what is racist, in parenthesis, about this, ... There was, because when I was a kid, that was okay. Okay? She was asking a question. So that is really important to identify. Why? Because you are a person asking questions about how to fit in our society whose discussion about values is changing. Okay? She's no dummy. This is a bright woman. And we all are in a society whose values are wobbly and changing. And we're all trying to do the right thing. And we're all trying to be seen as responsible. So we have to fire the people who do something badly because otherwise the backlash of blah, blah, blah. That's what's too much. It's disproportionate. We need to make a safe environment to learn about each other, especially when it comes from a place of kindness. Her mistake was not coming from a malicious place. Recently, there was a lot of backlash from the Wiccan community about Sephora and this witch kit that they were going to promote. And there was a lot of discussion about that. Not everybody felt the same way, and sadly, the kit was taken off the market. Why? Because as soon as something happens, we these days, with all of this media that is so pervasive and so readily available to everyone, we can bully each other into non-existence. Not every Wiccan, not every witch, not every person felt that way about the Sephora kit before it came out. I made a video on it anyways, but yeah, that's an example of how everybody sort of gets on the bandwagon and bullies socially, and we justify it because if we use the words PC, or if we use the words we're defending culture, if we use if we blame somebody and say it's cultural appropriation for you to be doing XYZ, if we couch it in that kind of a statement, then it almost becomes okay to accuse, and in a very damaging way. So we really need to look now at the way we say things and create a safe learning environment, because not everybody means to be offensive. Yeah. So if freedom of speech and freedom of expression are really to be respected, then I propose an addendum to the ever-morphing practice of Halloween. Here's the addendum. Now, the idea is wear a costume and bring a positive, educated message with it. Let's refocus Halloween a little bit. Wear the costume you want. Instead of looking at wearing a costume as an opportunity to point fingers and shame each other, look at it as a learning opportunity. And as an educator, I'm partial to this. There are people who have walked before us who have shaped who we are in a very positive way. Children can look at social icons and learn and be proud of their accomplishment and want to model example. What would it be if October was a month where you spent time researching your favorite person And I'm not just saying that Halloween should only be that, but what if we provided an opportunity to learn about the good deeds that somebody did and then dress like them, regardless of what you look like, because you're donning the costume, the identity, the archetype of somebody else. And it's a learning opportunity. So let me just shape this a little bit for you and just propose how we can spin this so that we can be reasonable. Now, regardless of the racial or the cultural origin of the person wearing the costume, don a costume in a positive with a positive message. Don a costume with a positive message. So, you're a child, you're an adult, wear a costume and dress like Martin Luther King. And what is your message? Social justice and social equality for all. Wow, is that offensive? Well, it is if you want it to be. But I know that when I was a kid and I was knocking on the doors for trick or treat, and I would say trick or treat, and when I was a kid, we had to do a little trick. So sometimes they'd say, okay, well, explain your costume. That could be your trick. Or recite a poem or sing a song. You know, it's not just for free candy. Say at least please and thank you. Some people were like, at least say please and thank you to the group of kids who were around us. And so sometimes I would sing Christmas songs because those are the ones that I knew the best. And those are the ones that we could all sing together as a group, you know. So why couldn't your trick be something like, in 1 or 2 sentences, explain your costume? I am dressed like Nelson Mandela, and I admire him because he was an inspiration. He spoke about courage and compassion and commitment to social justice and the abolishment of apartheid. In the same vein, you could dress like Desmond Tutu, regardless of what you look like, regardless of your skin tone. I would love to dress like Jane Goodall. Advocacy for the environment with primates. Advocacy and education regarding climate change. You know, that could be a great learning opportunity. The whole month of October could be a great learning opportunity. Sure, you could dress like some of the super characters that we know that have been, why does it always have to just be safe to dress like something that doesn't exist, like Superman and Wonder Woman and, Frankenstein and, So dress like President Obama. Why would I want to dress like President Obama? Well, because he, to me, demonstrates the ability to face criticism with diplomacy. That man had style. He has style. He still does. He has the ability to connect with people. He just comes on and, I'm one of the ones who like him. Okay. Queen Elizabeth. You want to dress like an archetype? Dress like the queen. You want to dress like somebody who matters? Dress like Queen Elizabeth. She demonstrates lifelong service, diplomacy, role modeling, a lifelong duty to others. That is Queen Elizabeth in a nutshell. Now, she may mean something else to you, but as long as the message is positive, you're not dressing like her to be offensive. You are dressing like her because you've learned something about that person, and she's a model for you. So I know that we have like a diversity in the Disney princesses and that sort of thing. We're making them, more multicultural and more. They all have still the same body shape, and they all still have, they all sing and play with animals and stuff. And marry princes, and there's a marriage, and a lot of things are the same. But we change their skin tone and where they live. So, but I don't think that all Asian girls should aspire to be Mulan. And I don't think that all black girls have to be pigeonholed into being Tiana. Tiana is her name? Tiana with the tiara? There should be more options for self-expression. So dress like Lady Gaga. Good luck trying to pick one costume. For breaking down social barriers and for perseverance in the face of bullying, criticism. Dress like Michael Jackson. Not to ridicule, No, but because I was 13 in 1982, I'm partial to Michael. And say in your messages, dedication to your craft. If ever there was a person who did lifelong dedication to their craft, perfecting and being a real master of their craft, it was him. For normalizing and acclimatizing Black music to the global market. Should you have to be of a different, like any race should be able to aspire and just try and be, we look to role models. That's the thing. We look to role models for good behavior. At least I do. And we have to spend less time tearing people apart for, being unintentionally offensive. If I was a kid, actually, you know what? Here's the thing. Now, the world has changed, but in the early 80s, I had a perm, and that was intentional. I would wear it wet. I would put hairspray in it and gel, and I bought a red jacket, and alone in my room, I would wear a white glove, and everybody was dancing Thriller, and everybody was making themselves look a little more tan and a little more, and it wasn't because it was Halloween. It was because we were being socially acclimatized to how cool it was to be Black. I mean, not that I was ever Black, but it just, it became, there was something magical about that, about Michael, and it just became more. I mean, my first boyfriends, kind of like he's my boyfriend, in my teen years, there was a number of them who were Black, and it was exciting because we had dances to go to, and I was learning a whole different kind of music and a different kind of way of dancing, and I had different friends who were talking about different things and who were eating, different foods. And it was okay. And you end up sharing each other's cultural experience. But it was such a marriage of friendships when you acclimatize each other to your social values and your differences. And there has to be more of that. They never once told me. I remember sitting on the stoop with my friend Dee. I'll just call her Dee, and she was putting dark powder makeup on my face, and there was a special kind of what's called a hot comb, and her brother was like, "Don't!" They're a Jamaican family. They're like, "Don't! You can't curl her hair with that." She wants to, Dee said. She wants to. You're gonna burn her hair off. And I learned about the hot comb, and I learned about spinners and Jamaican food, and why? Because she was painting my face darker, and that kind of stuff was okay, and it was learning. And I think people today would look at that very differently, and it's not supposed to be offensive to blend together, Anyway, so if I wanted to dress as somebody now, as if I was a kid, I think I would probably want to dress as Oprah. Why? Because although she is Black, and we love her because she's Black, but she also transcends culture and race. She is our soul. She speaks to our soul. She's the queen of communication. What I know for sure, she says. So getting down to the bottom line of having processed information in your life lessons, really coming to grips with how you learn something. What I know for sure, that's what she says. She is skilled in reaching people through the simple act of chatting, of talking, which we can all do. Life lessons, that's what she's about. Grace and inner strength. Overcoming life of abuse and transforming it into being using that pain that she lived through and using it for education for others and speaking with the soul of other people. She's not just presenting on the top here on the surface. She gets right to that level of who you are. That's why I think she's a role model. And that's why I would want to dress like Oprah. When in the early 80s, when I was still, old enough to process information, which was like over the age of 10 and make my own costume, but still young enough to go to Halloween and trick-or-treating, there was a show called Mama's Family with Vicki Lawrence. It was a spin-off from the Carol Burnett show, and I dressed as Mama from Mama's Family. I put a great big pillow on my butt, tied it to my butt, wore a great big muumuu, and I powdered my hair white and put it up and with great big snap-on jewelry that froze to my ears, and I had to come back and painfully take them off. I had to wait till they thawed out. Great big bosom, and I acted as an old lady, and my costume was not just old lady, which is probably what other people saw, but I was Mama from Mama's Family. That was my costume that year. And it was not an offense to being old. It was not ridiculing old people. It was, I liked that show, and that was the level of understanding that I had. So in the same vein, why can't we say to children, dress as you like, and maybe take the opportunity to learn about a character in history and dress like that, regardless of what your origin is. Because if all white people are expected to be Cinderella, Snow White, and Sleeping Beauty, period, end of story, ugh, And we shouldn't also only have to dress as fictitious characters like gnomes and that Fiona, Shrek Princess, We shouldn't only just sort of dress like monsters and characters like that. We should be proud of who we are as people and our accomplishments, and recognize our accomplishments rather than just see each other for the surface of, what has been traditionally practiced by people in your culture or your race. So consider for Halloween dressing as an archetype and bringing a positive message, an educated message, like dress as the trickster or the joker, or a mother or a judge, or the death card in the tarot, tarot cards. Dress like a tarot card. Or you can dress like death. That's the archetype of death with the side. That's been done. Dress as a butterfly, as the symbol of transformation, and talk about the symbolism of transformation. Bring a message about your costume. Dress like Zeus. You don't have to be Greek to dress like Zeus. It's not about wearing a costume of any type. It's about how we interpret it and how we treat each other. Dress like Gandhi and bring a message of nonviolence. Why are you dressed like Gandhi? Because I aspire. It's an homage to him as a person. I aspire to embrace his ideals of his message of nonviolence. How is that not a Halloween costume that is appropriate? I'm going to go on a limb here and go on to say there may be some kids who may want to research physics and black hole and quantum physics and be a bit of a science punch-up. So dress like Stephen Hawking. That should not be offensive. If you spend the entire month of October researching this person and seeing how, you can't, put a box around you that looks like a wheelchair and strap it over your shoulders and, go like this and make fun of a person with a disability. No. But you can learn to express yourself and explain how, even in the face of physical disability, even in the face of illness, this man overcame so much and didn't sit complacently back. He gave to the world a wealth of knowledge, and he is competent, he is knowledgeable, he spent his life producing information and advancing concepts in science. And if a child wants to dress like Stephen Hawking because that is their role model, it should not be seen as ridiculing anyone, you know? And there's also a way to sort of wear the costume too. If you're being, ridiculing about it and making fun of, whatever. But there's a way to present yourself. And I think as a very young person, it's time that we learn how to present our ideas in a really respectful way and to explain things in the face of a world who just seems to be more interested in tearing each other apart. Yeah, rather than building each other up. Dress like Deepak Chopra and talk about how he was a model for spiritual development, alternative medicine, and holistic health. Dress like Mother Teresa, not because you want to look like somebody who's impoverished and thin and from a different country, but because you want to talk about her missionary work and a life of selflessness. Dress like Charles Darwin if you can, pioneer in thinking about evolution of man. Dress like Thomas Edison, an inventor. Put a light bulb on your head. Talk about that if that is something that you're keen on. Every year could be such a learning opportunity for our children. Dress like any author. Why should you pigeonhole yourself and just talk up and dress like Hermione Granger or Harry Potter? Like dress, I don't know how you would dress like J.K. Rowling, but dress like an author. And if you as a child want to learn about that author's life and how they changed the world with their literature, how could afford our children some space to learn? Why should we be pointing each other's, the finger at everybody and shaming each other all the time? Dress like Angelina Jolie and talk about humanitarianism. Dress like Carl G. Jung, who's a psychologist who developed the very idea of archetypes. Dress like Julie Andrews, who's the epitome of etiquette and living an ideal life and surviving the loss of her singing voice. And she did it with grace and success, and I just really admire that woman. So, yes. Let's stop using human experience, which is the need for learning about each other. Let's stop using human experience like our identity as we belong to one or the other race or one or the other culture. Let's stop using the human experience as a way, as a tool for shaming ourselves, and reframe life as an opportunity for a learning experience that unites us. Okay, so that is my 2 cents for what it's worth. That's my message for today. I hope you get the essence of what I'm saying. Onward and upward. Have a wonderful and safe Halloween. Express yourself. Enjoy life. Learn much. And be kind to each other.